as of November 1, there have been 15 strikes on alleged drug vessels that have killed at least 64 people. If you were going to ask me, I would say, do I think that they're probably mostly drug dealers, if not all of them.
Donald Trump isn't the first president to make pretty extreme claims about his authority to use force, but this is one that we haven't seen before.
The U.S. military is blowing up boats, allegedly smuggling drugs. Now, the reason it's not getting that much attention is probably because it's likely these people are transporting drugs. And as a result, most of us don't really care if drug traffickers end up getting killed. The problem is that's not the way our justice system is supposed to work. And there is no death penalty for narco terrorists in this country. So what could possibly be the legal justification? I mean, seriously, what could possibly be the justification legally? I understand the moral. Look, the moral, if you say, well, they don't have the legal right to do this. The easy response is you're an egghead, right? Oh, you what? You want them to come to the United States? No, it's not what I said. I just don't even know, even arguably, what the argument is. So let me take you through what's happened up to now, and then we're going to take calls on this. I got a guest who's going to be joining us in a moment to talk about the legal side of this. But as of November 1, there have been 15 strikes on alleged drug vessels that have killed at least 64 people. 64. That's a big number, right? September 2nd was the first strike. Killed 11 people who the president said were positively identified as narco terrorists who were operating under the control of Venezuelan President Maduro. Second strike reportedly killed 3 people who Trump said were 3 male terrorists killed in action. Third strike reportedly killed 3. Trump said they were working for an unspecified designated terror organization. Fourth one killed 4 people they said were, quote, male narco terrorists. Trump said the boat was loaded with enough drugs to kill 15 to 20,000 people. The Colombian president posted on X the people on board this boat were actually from Colombia. Fifth strike reportedly killed 6. Trump said they were male. Trump said intelligence confirmed they were trafficking narcotics. Sixth one, 2 people killed and 2 survived. Video showed a semi-submersible that Trump says was, quote, loaded up with fentanyl. The 2 survivors were released to Colombia and Ecuador. Now, by the way, on October 16th, the same day as the 6th strike, Admiral Alvin Halsey, commander of troops in the region, as Southcom chief, announces he's stepping down after less than a year in the post. That is something that got very little attention. You have to wonder, was he saying, what the heck are we doing? The 7th strike announced by Hegseth was on October 17th. The 8th, they're now being announced by Hegseth. 2 people killed. The 9th, 3 people killed. That was on October 22nd. This is like happening every 2 days now. The 10th one was announced by Hegseth in the Caribbean. 6 people killed. He said a gang was the target. On October 28th, he announced 3 strikes that hit 4 alleged drug vessels. 8 people killed in the first, 4 in the second strike, 3 in the third. Quote, a total of 14 narco terrorists were killed during the 3 strikes, with 1 survivor. Apparently the Mexican authorities accepted responsibility for coordinating the rescue. On October 30th, Hegseth announced 4 people were killed, and November 1st, 3 more. I mean, in any other world, with any other president, this would be the only topic we'd be talking about. But in this presidency, it gets forgotten. And look, again, if you were going to ask me, I would say, do I think that they're probably mostly drug dealers, if not all of them. But that's just not the way our justice system works. So before I talk to William Banks from Syracuse University, I want to understand what the argument is that this is somehow permissible. I mean, because I can't even think about what would make it legally permissible to be going after. By the way, it's not even people from one country. It's not even people from one gang, right? I mean, you know, when we targeted Al Qaeda, right, there was legislation about Al Qaeda and this. I mean, here you're talking about like, well, he's a narco terrorist. It's like, okay. It's like saying, we killed criminals today. Bad guys. There were some guys in masks on a boat. But here is a Lexington Institute senior fellow, Dr. Rebecca Grant. This is number 4 on Fox News yesterday, defending the president's strikes on these drug boats. Let's listen.
We don't know who's driving those boats that the U.S. is blowing out of the water. How do you see it?
Oh, heck no. Those critics are wrong, John. We have exquisite maritime surveillance. Now, the Pentagon doesn't want to talk about this because it's an active intelligence operation. But we have, you know, the P-8 surveillance plane. That's a Boeing 737 with an enormous radar on it. And that is just one asset. So we can see, our military can see the crew coming up to the dock. They can probably see the color of the paint on the boat. And they are incredibly careful about selecting these legitimate narco-terrorist targets and hitting them in international waters. There is no accident here. Trump and Rubio are very clear on this policy, and they're executing it quite cleanly, and I think they're going to keep at it.
But how would this person even know that they're doing it cleanly, right? I mean, she may be right. And I think she is right, by the way, about the surveillance, about the extent to which we can identify. But how does she know that it's clean? And that's the point. Is there's no process. I don't know. Let me ask William Banks, professor emeritus of law at Syracuse University. He's also the founding director of the Institute for National Security and Counterterrorism, now called the Institute for Security Policy and Law. Thank you for coming back on the show, Professor. All right, what is there even a possible legal argument here to justify this?
The administration has developed a legal argument. I think early on, there wasn't really any response from the administration about the law. When you ticked off all of the incidents that have occurred now for about 2 months. But in recent weeks, because there is a law called the War Powers Resolution that purports to require the president to terminate any actions where the U.S. is involved in hostilities within 60 days, and that 60-day clock was about to expire, probably in the last couple of days. The administration did develop a legal argument that it doesn't have to follow the terms of that law because striking the drug boats doesn't engage the United States in hostilities. I think that's a very weak argument, but it's the argument that the administration has made so far.
But hang on. You were saying the War Powers Resolution and the 60-day clock. What even, again, theoretically, I'm not saying you support it, but just explain it to us.
Sure.
What is their argument for why they would even have 60 days?
Their argument is that these strikes do not involve the United States in the use of force, do not involve the United States in a war, do not involve the United States in what the War Powers Resolution calls hostilities, because they're one-offs. The United States personnel, none of them are at personal risk of being engaged in a fight with an adversary. These are remotely launched. They're by and large drones or other missiles that are fired from afar. So because no one on our side is getting hurt and there's no risk of any of us on our side getting hurt, the United States can do what it wants to do. And there isn't a law that would attempt to rein that in or to limit it in some way.
Wait, but you said there's no use of force. I mean, is that one of the standards here, that there can't be a use of force? I mean, how could this not be deemed to be a use of force?
It's hard to make this argument with a straight face, but I'm trying my best.
I appreciate it.
If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck and so on, it's a duck. If you're shooting somebody with a heavy armament, a missile, or a drone-based device, and you killed 3 people or 6 people or 9 people, that sounds to me like a use of force.
Right.
In other settings, it's been called murder.
Right. And so that's, again, I just want to understand all the legal issues here. So you're saying that that was the first line of attack, right? Which gives them a 60-day window.
Right.
So that's under the War Powers Resolution?
Yeah, the War Powers Resolution, if I can explain for a moment,
Please.
it was enacted by Congress in the waning days, months, and years of the Vietnam War. It had been the case for a long time that decisions about the use of military force by the United States were made by Congress
Right.
following a declaration of war.
Right.
As your listeners know, the United States hasn't declared war since World War II. 1942 was the last declaration, as a matter of fact. That's become anachronistic. It's not a thing anymore. But what the Congress has, and during that period between World War II and the present, gradually the use of force, the initiative to use force on behalf of the United States crept away from Congress into the lap of the executive. Certainly, Donald Trump is not the first president to utilize armed force on behalf of the United States. They started right after. They started with Harry Truman in North Korea in 1950. And so we're 75 years from North Korea, and every president since has utilized force on his own initiative. Many of us who study this as a matter of legal analysis still believe that unilateral uses of the force by the President of the United States are unlawful unless the United States has been attacked. Abraham Lincoln responded to the attack on Fort Sumter to start the Civil War in 1861, and he had no choice. He had to respond to the attack on Fort Sumter. He was challenged in the Supreme Court of the United States, and the court allowed him to respond by using force in response to force. Abraham Lincoln was waging what we call a defensive war. And from that day, so now we're a century and a half since the Civil War, presidents have been, by all sides, political sides, agreeably able to use force on behalf of the United States when fighting defensively. It's pretty hard to argue that these drug boat attacks are defensive, only in the sense that we're defending against a drug scourge that is indeed harming many Americans, but we don't fight a nonviolent drug scourge with force, certainly not unless the Congress authorizes it.
But you mentioned that other presidents have used, and we're talking to Professor William Banks from Syracuse University. You mentioned other presidents have used this power, whether it exists for them or not, but have done it. Is this different?
This is different because there was no provocation. There was no provocation in.
Well, they'd say fentanyl. They'd say bringing fentanyl into the country was the provocation, right?
Yeah, fentanyl's not a gun. Fentanyl doesn't. A single dose of fentanyl directed at a person isn't lethal. So the fact that the drugs end up killing people it's a public health problem. It's a law enforcement problem for sure. It is an intelligence problem, as your earlier excerpt suggested, but it's not one for the use of force unless Congress chooses to authorize it. That's highly unlikely.
Right. So it seems to me that the only real justification for this is a policy one and a moral one. There really isn't even a legal. I mean, because, yeah, it's very easy to make a sort of, broad moral. Well, the drugs are terrible. They're killing people in the United States. These people are bringing them across. Exactly what that woman said. We've got great intelligence that says that these guys are doing it, but that's not a legal argument.
It's not. And indeed, we have very sophisticated intelligence and law enforcement capabilities in the United States. These people could be apprehended. They could be apprehended on the high seas. They could be apprehended in their home countries, or upon trying to enter the United States with drugs.
And do we know that no troops are at risk? I mean, one of the things you said was that one of the arguments they make is that there are no risks, right, when it comes to, but this is Senator Mark Warner, Democrat from Virginia. This is number 7 on Face the Nation yesterday, talking about this.
I got an aircraft carrier from Norfolk that's in the Caribbean right now. How do I answer the families of those sailors about whether this operation is even legal? This document needs to be shared with every member of the Senate this week so that as we get into this discussion about war powers, we've got the basis of how the administration is claiming that it's legal.
Yeah. I mean, and where are you getting, just so I understand, Professor Banks, before we go to some calls here, because we got a lot of people have comments and questions about this at 866-967-6887. Where are you getting the information about what the administration's legal defense is? Is that coming from the Department of Justice? Is that coming from the Department of War? Like, where's that coming from?
It's now coming from the Department of Justice only in recent days. They actually responded to what would have been a clock that was running in the Congress, the 60-day clock that I described a bit earlier. So they did submit a response through the Justice Department, making the argument that these are not hostilities because no Americans are at risk.
Right. And so if there are no hostilities, what, again, just because I'm just still a little confused.
Yeah, the triggering language in the War Powers Resolution says that at any time that the United States is involved in or may become involved in a situation of hostilities,
right,
you have to report to Congress and you have 60 days to get in and get out. That's
right, but that would
simplifying.
explain the 60 days, right? But it sounds like they're saying now that they have a bigger window, right?
They have a bigger window because they think that the hostilities rubric, if you will, isn't even applicable here. So in other words, they can do what they want to do.
But if that's the case, then the War Powers Act isn't even the justification for it, right?
That's right.
So then what is?
They're relying on the president's constitutional power to, as commander-in-chief, and to conduct the foreign relations of the United States.
Okay.
And
so
if you believe that, I've got a used car. I'd like.
Yeah,
to
I mean, that's not a legal justification to just say, well, the president's authority is I mean, you could justify anything saying
that's right. That's right. Donald Trump isn't the first president to make pretty extreme claims about his authority to use force, but this is one that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, and look, and I think that that's important context here, right? Which is that Trump is not the first president to be seen as exceeding his power in this role, right? I mean, what would you say is the next, before I go to calls, I'm sorry, I'm so curious about this. What is the next best example you can think of where, let's assume that what Trump has done has the least justification as a legal matter? What would be the second least justification that a president has had to use this kind of force historically?
Well, I think there are 2 or 3 periods in the Vietnam War where presidents took extraordinary measures without the support of Congress, but argued that they had the constitutional authority to proceed. As everybody will remember from studying history, Vietnam happened gradually, but it happened after some very major steps forward by different presidents there that you could point the finger at John Kennedy or at Lyndon Johnson or at Richard Nixon. Each of the 3 of them took extraordinary measures to act on their own initiative on behalf of the United States.
All right, Professor William Banks from Syracuse University is with us. He is the founding director of what is now called the Institute for Security Policy and Law. We're talking about whether there's really any legal justification for this. And look, and I get it, because please, if you're going to call in and tell me how bad drug dealers are, you don't need to lecture me about that. I get it. I am not saying that as a moral matter, I'm going to defend these guys. I'm just trying to understand, as a legal matter, there isn't a death penalty for drug dealing, even if you're a, quote, narco-terrorist. So I just don't understand what the legal justification is here. And as you've heard Professor Banks say it seems the administration isn't even relying anymore on the war powers resolution. They're now just sort of saying he can do it. And I guess the problem is there's no one, if Congress isn't going to try to step in and say you're not allowed to do it. Sorry, last question because I know I keep wanting to go to calls. But is there anyone who would have standing to sue the government if Congress isn't going to step up to get them to stop?
No.
Okay.
That's the simple answer. You know, there have been very few survivors of any of these strikes, and they're not in the United States, so they don't have access to lawyers or a court proceeding. And there's no one else who has a significant legal interest to get standing in court. Congress could, if they mustered a majority to challenge the president, they could sue him, but of course they won't.
Right.
You played a clip from Senator Warner. He's one of the leading experts in this area in the United States Senate, but he's like a lone wolf out there. There's almost no one else who's singing his tune.
And I'm not even playing sound from like UN. We got UN human rights offices are talking about it.
Right. There's an international law dimension to all of this that we haven't even discussed. But
I don't know, how does that matter? There's no enforcement mechanism for any of this international. So to sort of say, oh, well, he's violating international law, that's even less enforceable than the president saying he's using his constitutional duty, right?
Unless the government of Venezuela or the government of Colombia or something tried to sue the United States in the World Court, in the International Court of Justice in The Hague. That's conceivable. Yeah. It's a stretch. It's not likely to occur.
And you also know what Trump would say about that.
I do know what he would say. We were sued by the United States was sued by the government of Nicaragua in the 1970s for laying mines in Managua, Nicaragua, and the court basically slapped the United States on the hands and said, you violated international law. We said, thank you very much.
Yep.